We are finally underway. The recording is starting. I will just share my camera initially. I just popped in to get the link and usher everyone into this room that was in the other room. So welcome to the first online session. I am repeating myself for what I said a short while ago in the other room. My name's Rodney Duffett. I'm from the marketing department. I was recently fortunate enough to be promoted to full professor. And yeah, I've been at CPUT. Well, I started in Pentech in 1998. And I've been, then we merged. So I've been with the institution for, a number of years now. And yeah, I hope to just share some initial, a few initial important topics regarding your research. I actually went around the room to find out what every person was doing because there was only a couple of people, but I unfortunately can't do this with 40 people in the room. I'm going to hide my camera, and then Andre, I think I'll use you as my voice just to check each time that you can see my screen, because sometimes it is I'm talking about something and you can't see the screen. So Andre, could you just confirm that you can see on your screen topic selection and research proposal guidelines 2025?
Not yet, Prof.
Okay, not yet. Let's just give it a second. That's why I asked someone. So you can't see yet, I think. Let's just check. You know what I haven't done yet, Andre? I haven't shared my screen yet. That would help. Okay.
Okay, there you go. It's on, Prof. I can see it now.
Perfect. And if I just move down, can you see the next slide? What can you see?
It didn't move yet.
Not yet. Okay, searching and identifying a suitable topic. I'm just wondering when I must stay in the PDF or must go to the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Has it moved?
Searching and identifying a suitable research topic. Yes,
okay.
That's on.
Perfect. Okay, I'm just going to move back to the first slide, and there seems to be a bit of a lag, but there we go. So tonight's topic, and we've lost, 20 minutes, so we may carry on a bit later, but if you cannot stay, because of whatever commitment you have, then we are recording this, and I will actually place this recording on Blackboard, but I will also replace it on YouTube. So if you want to watch last year's YouTube video, this is the YouTube link. However, what I'll do after the presentation tonight is I'll put this presentation on YouTube, and then when I upload this PowerPoint to Blackboard, I will then put the 2025 link for you so that you can see this presentation. So we're covering topic selection. What I don't mention is we're also covering the library literature search, and then we are covering the research proposal guidelines specifically for the faculty and business and management sciences template. We use that, and that's some of my other details. So, right, let's go down to the first point. So the first topic that we're covering is the topic. So searching and identifying a suitable research topic. How do you do that? And initially it's quite daunting when you first start your research. You don't know really what you want to conduct your research in, or you may have a vague idea. And so tonight I will show you from selecting your topic all the way through to writing up your research proposal. So the first step is to read some more. Firstly, start off with like popular press articles, trends, research topics. Look at newspapers or magazines. Well, no one looks at the physical copies, but we're talking about online news and magazines, websites, blogs, online sources, are all areas you can find and identify trends. You may notice, something that's trending a hang of a lot these days is artificial intelligence. So there may be some aspect of artificial intelligence in whichever discipline you are that you could perhaps conduct research. Then it's also to read academic work. So read master and doctoral theses, journal articles, textbooks, or other areas that could give you good ideas for topics. I will cover this shortly, is SARBinet's current and completed research. So this database actually shows you every single thesis that has been published in the country. You'll be able to find it on this particular website. And then discuss possible, I'm just trying to see how I can get rid of this, can't get rid of this. Discuss possible research interest and topics with academics, colleagues, students, and mentors. So if you're in a small group or in a group of other students, you may be doing a course-based work, or you may be in a cohort of students where you can discuss your topic with others, also is another way to help um, find possible topics. So I'm going to move to the next slide, which says feasibility, viability of the research topic. Hopefully you'll be able to see this slide in a moment. Oh, and by the way, if you have questions, just jot them down, because once I'm finished each section, then I'll pause and just say, do you have any questions regarding this? Otherwise, you can just hold them till the end of the presentation. But once I've covered the topic, I will just zip back into the group, and then you can ask any questions. So good questions to assess whether your topic is feasible and viable is the research topic relevant to the discipline? So my discipline's marketing, and often students come with topics, but I say, well, what's the marketing application? So whatever discipline you're in, it needs to be related to your discipline in some or other way. Will the research topic keep you interested for the next 2 to 4 years? Or if you're a part-time doctoral student, you can take 6 years to complete your thesis. So, are you not going to get bored after a year or two and lose interest? Will this research or topic trend still be relevant in 5 years' time? So everyone's going AI, AI, AI. In 5 years' time, is it still going to be a hot topic, or will it have died down? I mean, social media is still a hot topic, and this is after like 15 years or so. It's still big, and people are still doing a lot of research on social media. But certain social media platforms died. So when I did my doctoral thesis, one part of it was on Mixit. And I don't know how many of you used Mixit back in the day, but it no longer exists. So I managed to finish my thesis just before Mixit kind of disappeared off the market. And another one is MySpace. Used to be bigger than Facebook, but MySpace is tiny, tiny, tiny now. So again, you need to ask yourself, is this trend going to be around long enough for you to complete the thesis? A lot of people did research on COVID-19, and now students come with the COVID-19 topic, and I say, sorry, but you've kind of missed the boat. In most instances, it's not going to be relevant anymore. So that is important, that your topic has longevity. In other words, it's still going to be relevant. Have you identified a suitable research gap that will justify this research topic? And I'm going to speak about that extensively in the research proposal. Will you be able to get permission to access the data? Now, all of you are going to need to require ethics for your research. And in part of the ethics submission is to get a permission letter from a company or organization or wherever you're going to conduct the research. So if you say, I'm going to conduct my research at the waterfront, well, I'm going to say you're never going to get permission from the waterfront. They don't give permission very easily to conduct research at the waterfront. So that you need to ask yourself, can this research topic be empirically tested? Is it researchable? Some topics are not researchable. I can't really give you a good example of that, but there are topics that are hard to test. Do you have the money, the time, and the ability to implement? So a lot of students say, yeah, I'm going to use random sampling. Well, random sampling means you have a list of every single person in that population group, which is very, very expensive to get that. So those are things you also need to ask. Does the research topic have practical and theoretical implications? So most research needs to have a theoretical underpinning, In other words, based on some type of theoretical model, or some type of theoretical model, yeah, just serves as the basis for it. And then what are the practical implications? Who's it going to help? Is it going to help companies? Is it going to help government, policymakers? Whether it's master's or doctorate, your research should have some type of theoretical and practical implications, or they also call it managerial implications. Is this topic sufficient enough to warrant research? So what? Who cares? So a lot of people come up with topics and you say, but yeah, so you've done this research and is it of interest to anyone? Will an opportunity be missed if the research is not conducted? So those are some questions you can ask yourself about your research topics if you're just starting your research. And I'm going to jump back straight into the research title, which is directly linked to your topic. And I'm going to use one of my master students um, as an example throughout this presentation, just so that you've got something tangible to see. So the core components of a topic or your research title, which you'll have to get approved on HT Digital, is a theoretical model or something linking to it, the broad theme, a specific topic, could be a particular industry or institutional product categories. Who is the target group or units of analysis or sample? What is the context or location? If you have all of these variables in your title, then people will be fairly, happy with you. So the model that this student of mine, she is using the perceived risk model and the technology acceptance model, or TAM, which you'll see more of this later. Her broad theme is artificial intelligence in marketing. Her specific topic is AI chatbots and virtual assistants used in marketing communications. And the particular industry, while she's going to conduct it across sectors, she's not going to select one specific industry to conduct it in, because that would give her a smaller pool of samples. And this units of analysis, well, specifically she's focusing, I think, on Gen Z, but you could also focus on Gen Y, Gen X, baby boomers, or another particular group of consumers. And then the context or location, so she could limit it to Cape Town or South Africa. So if you answer and you're able to, and the theoretical framework, you don't need to fill in all of these variables. You just take the final dependent variable of this, which could be purchase intention, could be included in your topic. So if we put all this together, okay, we'll go to the examples now. Just other things that relate to your title. Generally, titles range from 12 to 15 words. They reflect the important independent, dependent, and location variables. I can talk a bit about that later if there's time. Do not start a title with a present participle, so they don't want you to say investigating or analyzing. It's just one of the things, you'll see journal articles with it, but at CPUT, they prefer you not. Avoid meaningless words in your title, such as an analysis, an investigation, and study, and exploration. It is obvious that your study is all of these things in any event, so don't include it in your title. Add the context we've mentioned, and you can refer to the electronic thesis and dissertation repository. So the CPT library website provides all of the theses that were completed at CPUT, is a good place to find examples of titles. Sabinet's current completed research, which I've already mentioned, is another good place that you could look for titles. And then journal article titles all serve as examples as well. So based on the example, her title could be The Influence of AI Chatbots and Virtual Assistants on Gen Z's Attitudes in Cape Town. Or if she's going across different cohorts, it could be The Influence of AI Virtual Assistants on different cohorts. If you had a specific attitude, could be Purchase Intention in South Africa. Or if it was a specific area, so the effect of AI chatbots on multiple cohorts in Nyanga. So an example, etc., etc., etc. Attitudes could be replaced with, as I say, if you're looking at customer satisfaction is the final dependent variable, then it could be cohorts customer satisfaction, or it could be purchase intention or electronic word of mouth, or whatever the case may be. So those are some examples of titles based on your topic. So I'm going to pause here and come back in the room. Are there any questions regarding the topic and the title aspect, which is the first part of the presentation? Or are you all good at the moment? Okay. If you do think of something, you can just jot it down and we can come to it at the end. So, right, I see a few thumbs up. I'm going to dive back into the presentation, but not the same one. We'll come back to that one. I'm going to dive into the CPT library search. Just Andre, just to check with you, you can see on your screen the CPT library literature search 2025.
All good, Prof.
Perfect. So here is
Prof, there's a hand. There's a
okay.
hand.
Okay, they can fire away.
My bad. I'll change reaction. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
No problem. After this little section, I'll give another opportunity, and then the third section, I'll give another opportunity. Okay, so the CPT library searcher here is a current YouTube video. I think I went through this with my advanced diploma students, this example. So this YouTube video, I won't change. It will give you a current and much more in-depth discussion of the time I've got now. So I actually went online and everything I've showed you, I showed them. But now I've just taken screenshots, but I'm not going to have time to go in because we delayed the start quite significantly and I've got a lot to get through. But here is a YouTube video. It's not long, like 20-30 minutes of the same presentation, but it will be over at a much slower pace, so and maybe a bit more in depth. So just take note, and this, I'll make this PowerPoint available to you on Blackboard, so you'll be able to get it. And if you want me to email these to you, if you don't have access to the Faculty of Business and Management Sciences postgraduate group, then you can always just drop me an email and say, please send me the presentations, but that will be much later tonight once I've uploaded the other presentation on YouTube, but otherwise they will be on Blackboard. So how do you search for literature? So the CPT library literature search. So the first step is to go to the CPT website and click on library. So I've just taken a screenshot here, and you'll see here's a picture of the CPT library website or CPT website. And here you see in the top left-hand corner is library. You click on library, then you click on research support. So I'll go down, you'll see research support. Here is the databases, but I just want to show you a few other things. So we go down from research support, and here you'll now be able to search the institutional repository and electronic theses and dissertation repositories. So if you click on research report, you'll have access to institutional repository and all the theses that were ever submitted to CPUT. So just to show you, here's a screenshot, and this is what the institutional repository looks like in sort of the middle of the screen, institutional repository, and then next to it you'll see electronic theses and dissertations. This research report, there's a lot of other useful things here. If you click on all these different links on the right, you know, from referencing to resources, but we're not covering all of that tonight. Now you can use keywords. So in using in continuing with that example of the title, so her topic is chatbots and virtual assistants. So you need to think of keywords related to a topic. So we could use keywords and various combinations of them, such as artificial intelligence marketing, chatbot marketing, virtual assistants marketing, and then the different constructs that she's researching, which comes from the perceived risk model and the TAM model. So you have financial, social performance, product security, and privacy, benefits or risk, because you can look at them from a positive point of view, then they're benefits. If you look at them negatively phrased, then they're risk, and the perceived risk model. And the TAM model, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, attitudes, purchase intention, technology acceptance. And then she had other constructs, customer engagement, virtual assistants, chatbots, and the different generations. So you could literally copy and paste all of this into, various combinations of this into the databases to search for different journal articles. And in the YouTube video, I actually practically show you how to do that, but I'll use screenshots for that purpose now. So now you can click databases, and this is what it looks like on the website. So you'll see databases, you click on databases, and then it gives you A to Z. So if you click on E, you'll be able to see Emerald, or if you click on S, you're going to see Science Direct. So, and here's some popular databases that I like to use. Emerald, Science Direct, which is also Elsevier, Sarbinet Reference, SAE Publications for South African sources. Sarbinet Reference is also good for South African publications. Dissertations and theses is for international theses. Current and completed research is the Sarbinet's South African theses from across the country, and WorldCut Dissertations is for international theses. I seldomly go beyond this. I usually start with Google Scholar, because if you search in Google Scholar, it finds all of these, Science Direct, all of these you can find under Google Scholar as well. And then I can go into specific databases and try different keywords to look for various sources. So just to show you, if I clicked E, then you would see Emerald, and Eric and other databases, but Emerald's a very good one. And if you click on Emerald, and then you need to click Open Database. So you click Open Database, and then you type in your username and password. So if you're not registered, you can't do this, but there are other ways you can get the articles. And the reason you log into the CPUT library database, instead of going directly to Emerald or directly to Google Scholar, which you can do, you don't need to go through the CPUT library website, is that CPUT pays some of these databases a lot of money to give you access to a greater number of articles than what you would have been able to have accessed if you went to Emerald directly or if you went to Google Scholar directly. So that is why you go through, because there's a lot of what's called embargoes on articles. So often they are closed for a year before you'll be able to access them. So it's better to try and access articles through the CPT library databases because they paid money to give you access to a greater number of articles. So that's the reason. So you'd put in your username, your password, and then there you go. You'll see the Emerald site, and now you can start searching. And this is what Science Direct looks like. And this is what Sarbinet looks like. And this is what Google Scholar looks like. Most of you are familiar. And also, it's important to use an advanced search function. So often you can search just in an article's title, or just in its abstract, or in its title, abstract, and keywords. And you can search by year, because you want to have recent articles. Generally, the last 5 years, is acceptable. You can have some older foundational articles. My rule of thumb is for every one older source, you should have 2 recent sources, but that's just what I tell my students. Some others just want you to have recent sources and a few older foundational sources. So if, for example, in Sarbinet, you see in the screen, you can search from 2020 to 2025. And here I've typed in chatbots and purchase intention to search in the title, the abstract, and keywords only. And then you can see I get 11 results that have those keywords in the title, abstract, or keyword. So you know that these sources are going to be very relevant to the source. And at CPUT, we fully subscribe to Elsevier, and so you should have access to all the articles on Science Direct. It's just they're quite higher grade articles and not always easy to understand. And then other tips, so that's one way. So I don't have the time to actually go into these sites, but on the YouTube video, you'll be able to see where I actually go in, but you can practice, is just to go to Google and type PDF at the end, e.g. chatbots, intention, purchase intention, PDF. And if we do this, you can see here it picks up ResearchGate. So that's, is the social media for academics where we upload all our work. And here you can see there's a whole lot of articles that have a PDF here, which means that if you click on this, you will actually get the article. So that's another way, but often the quality of the articles is not always the best. If you do that route, it's better to get it via the databases. Google Scholar as well, you get a lot of rubbish where there's a lot of predatory journals whose articles also show there. So if you get articles from the well-known publishers, Emerald, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, those type. There's a few others, IGI Global, it's quite a few big publishing houses, but you'll quickly pick up when there's a low quality article versus a higher quality article. But if you stick with the big publishers, and you can use theses from around the world as well. So Google Scholar is also useful to get a lot of the information for your reference list. So again, I would normally show you this, but I've taken screenshots. So copy whatever article title you found into Google Scholar, and then you click Cite. And then you'll get the actual, you'll actually get the article, but there's a few changes you need to make to convert it to Harvard. So you need to change their and to and. You need to swap their PP for a colon. And that's all. And then, but sometimes for journal articles, they don't update it. So it's a very good idea to double check the actual journal articles by clicking on the URL to see if there's a volume or issue number that was published later. So don't take the cite function as is. Always click on the hyperlink afterwards to see if there's not missing information. And for book chapters, theses, and conference proceedings, the Google Cite function doesn't give you all the information. You actually have to click on the hyperlink afterwards to get the other information. It always gets a thesis information wrong. It calls everything a doctoral thesis, whether it's an honors thesis or a master thesis. So you need to just then double check by going to the source's website. Because it often makes errors, but it can get you most of the information quite quickly. And here's an example. So this is what Google Scholar looks like, and you found an article, and then the cite is here. Click cite, or maybe I'll just go into it live afterwards, and then here you see it gives you can copy and paste this Harvard out, and then you can just adapt it to the CPT references. So that's a good way to get most of your reference information without having to type anything. Also, I use Sci-Hub as another means. Some people frown on this website, but they believe in open access. So there's particularly the older articles. If you can't get it and it's been blocked, you go to the Sci-Hub, you cut and paste the title or the DOI number of the article in, and it will give you access to a lot of the older articles. And ResearchGate is another platform. I would just register as a student even, and then you can also have access to articles. And if they don't have open access, you can just send them a message and say, please send me the article. Not all of them send you the article, but a good portion do actually send you the article afterwards. So those are other means to get articles. Here's an example. If I typed in this article, the role of chatbot, etc., and I click open, there it's given me the full article that I can download. So it's not for all articles, but you can, when if you can't get an article, sometimes you can get it through the Sci-Hub. So that's another little tip. And then ResearchGate, if you join ResearchGate, and you can even search ResearchGate, chatbots, purchase intention, or whatever, and you'll get a lot of articles through ResearchGate, which, as I said, is the social media for academics. If you still can't find anything, just Google it. If you've got the article title and you can't get it, just cut and paste the title into Google, and sometimes you get lucky and there's some platform that gives you access. While you're unregistered, so if you haven't registered for yet for some reason, you can still access the CPT repository. The theses are open access. You won't have access to the databases, but you can go directly to the website. You can go to Emerald, to Google Scholar, get the article names if you can't get them, and then you can go to Sci-Hub and ResearchGate and see if you can get the articles. As I say, search Google Scholar, and lastly, simply Google it. So even if you're not registered, you should be able to still get a lot of articles without too much difficulty, because a lot are published open access. And then there are also AI sites that can give you access to journal articles. Just some examples. There's millions coming each day, but connected papers, site.ai, housings are things you can play with to find sources. And Prof. Johannes Cornier's website, I've given you a link to this, and that's another way. I prefer to use the databases than to use AI sites, but maybe I'm a bit old school. A lot of my students use AI sites to find sources, and there's nothing wrong with that. We'll talk a bit more about AI later. Also, popular press. So from a marketing point of view, we have a wonderful site called Biz Community, where you can get a lot of sites. eMarketers, international site, Memburn, online newspapers, News24, Harvard. Never use these sites like as Wikipedia, never reference it. You can use it as a site to just get background information, just like AI as well. You can go to ChatGPT and ask for some background information, but you can't use it. It just maybe help you search for more specific terms, um, later to find the proper sources. So to shape your thinking, you can use these type AI platforms to, and then help it generate keywords you can use to search, and then you go to Google Scholar, Emerald, Elsevier, or whatever, and find it. So yes, that's the library literature research very in a nutshell. As I say, I went through it fairly quickly, but you have the PowerPoint, and you can watch that YouTube video that's on the actual PowerPoint, and where I actually practically go into all the databases and go into Google, and I go into Google Scholar and show you how to cite. So it's not a long video. You can go and watch that. Yeah. Any questions thus far now? There was a question a bit earlier about searching for sources or about the topic. Okay, you're all good. I can't see any hands. So now I'm going to delve into the main section. I'm going to do my best to try and finish by past, but I doubt it. I think we'll go maybe 15 minutes over. I'm going to talk about the proposal now. And there's a lot of sections in the proposal, and we're talking specifically about the Faculty of Business and Management Science proposal. And I just want to see, Andre, whether you can see the background to the research problem on your screen.
There you go, Prof. It's up now.
It's up. Thank you very much. So the proposal, we've covered the first aspect of the proposal is the title, and I've covered that. So for my students, I have developed sort of a formula for doing the background to the research problem. It definitely won't work maybe for all disciplines, but it seems to work quite well for my students if we break up the background to the research problem into 5 sections. And right, four subsections, and then there's a 5th final section. So what is the background to the research problem? Well, it lays the groundwork by citing the origin of the idea or the problem. And I typically break this into 4 sections. So this is really showing you why this research is necessary. And I strongly suggest that you mainly use sources that are aged, no more than 5 years old for this section. Some people even say 3 years old. There could be a few older foundational sources, but a majority of the sources definitely should be recent sources because it's talking about the necessity of your research. So the first little subsection I want my students to give is an overview or background of the research. In other words, all the research variables that are included in your title, as well as the context, should be discussed here. So if we go back to that example that I've used, firstly, AI chatbots and virtual assistants communication. So here you could just find general information about this topic. What is an AI chatbot? What are virtual assistants? How are they used in marketing communication? Just, you know, a paragraph, a short little paragraph, maybe 4 or 5 lines, explaining this using multiple sources so that people know what the research is about. We're also looking at different cohorts. So here you can just briefly, in your title, we look at Gen Z, or you could look across different cohorts. So here she would say, well, cohort analysis is examination of generations. And Generation Z is born between 1997 and 2012, and Y is between 1982 and 1996. So you just provide a bit of background information. You kind of locating, giving context to your study. And then you could talk about the theoretical frameworks you're using just in a little, again, in a brief paragraph. The perceived risk model consists of these variables. The TAM model consists of these variables. They're frequently used for digital media type related studies. And it is key that you don't take this information from one source. For each of these 3 areas, you could cite 5 or 6 sources. Because if you take each of these from one source, Turnitin will kill you. And you'll later on they'll talk about Turnitin and it will pick it up. And so you've got to be very, very careful. So use multiple sources and combine them. So if people read this, they look at your title, and in the first paragraph, they know what all the variables in your title, what it's about. Second, clarify the area of concern, justify the research. In other words, why is this researchable problem feasible? Does the preliminary data support the feasibility of this topic? Why is the topic important to the discipline, the country, the region? So again, I ask my students just to do initial research. So do a quick search on AI chatbots and virtual assistants on Google Scholar, Emerald, Elsevier, and on the South African sites, so SAE Publications and Sabinet, and then find out what has been conducted in South Africa. Now, saying that few studies are conducted in South Africa is not a reason. Saying, there's limited research on the topic, that is not a reason for conducting the research. But you could say that 5 studies were conducted in South Africa, and briefly, this is what they were about in, a line or 2 each. And you say globally, there's a lot of research on chatbots and virtual assistants, maybe not so much in the marketing domain, and you discuss that briefly. So you could cite 10 or 20 studies in 10 lines, literally. Half of it could be just references saying, these are the studies in South Africa, these are some of the recent studies across the globe. You could also then just find internet literature, it doesn't even have to come from an article, saying that AI is growing rapidly, and we all know it's growing every single day. But you want to speak from it from a marketing perspective. So how is it growing in terms of the use of marketing? So you could find a few journal articles, you could search just online AI marketing, and then talk how more companies are using it and how people are turning to AI to assist them, maybe to go and travel somewhere, or for other marketing purposes as a shortcut. Instead of looking online for solutions to their problems, their marketing problems in terms of buying a certain product or service, people are turning to AI as well. So find some information on that. And then increasing usage amongst consumer groups. So everyone's using AI, but it's more prevalent amongst the young people. So find research that supports this and say, wow, a number of studies were conducted amongst Gen Z and Y, and this is what they were about. However, this research, is going to focus on these frameworks. So those are the first 2 areas. The 2 most important areas to justify your research is the research gaps, what I call observed, and I'll just skip to the next slide, and the mandate for more research. But before I can cover these 2 sections, I'm going to jump all the way down to the literature review. And right, I'm going to, Andre, just to check if you can now see, it says 7, it's 0.7 summary of literature sources on your slide, on your screen. Is it come in?
Yeah, summary of literature
Perfect.
sources. That's up now, Prop.
Okay, perfect. So I've just jumped ahead a bit because I need to give you context before I can go to those 2 points of the background to the research problem. So as I said right at the beginning of the presentation, it's important to read all different types of sources. But once you know the topic, you must search and read, yes. But then you need to summarize and rewrite each journal article. So in your own words, putting your own thoughts into it, because you don't want Turnitin to kill you. So you need to summarize and rewrite each journal article and thesis or survey or industry or company report, specifically extracting information that relates to your research topic. Everything else you can pretty much ignore. Okay. The summaries can then be captured in a table. So what I tell my students is if when you're first starting with your research, or even when people apply, I say if you summarize 2 articles a day, you could have 60 in a month. You could have 120 in 2 months. And that's enough to base your whole proposal on. If you've read 120 articles, journal articles, and you've summarized them and you've extracted all the information, you will pretty much know exactly what your topic is and what your research is and what the gaps are. Okay, so how do you summarize the articles? So include the following. So I suggest that, and I'll just show you, these are the columns: authors, purpose, research methodology, main findings, and limitations. So this column, this research methodology column, is what I call the observed research gaps. So we're going to go down, could be observed research gaps. So when you summarize, very key to extract this information: where the study was conducted, in other words, which country, okay? Was it quantitative or qualitative, and was it a survey, in-depth interviews, or was it a systematic literature review? Extract that information. How many respondents? Who were the respondents? What theoretical models or frameworks or constructs did they consider? So that is what I call, you just observe, and you could get most of this information from the abstract of a thesis or from a journal article without even having to go to the methodology or findings section. So let's just go to these 2 examples. It's called article summary example. Hopefully that will appear on your screen shortly. So what I do is when I summarize, I have the authors and years. And so I in-text reference it correctly already. Source et al., the years published and the page numbers. Then I take the main aim of the study, but only extract the aim that relates to your study. They could have a lot of variables they're looking at that aren't relevant to your study, then don't include it. Focus on those aims and objectives that are relevant to your study from whatever research source you're using. Then you put down what I call the observed research gaps. So it's conducted in Portugal, it was quantitative, it was an online survey, it was amongst 298 participants or respondents, mainly Gen Y, Z. So you could just go and look at the ages of the respondents, and they used the TAM model. So they didn't say that there was a need for more research. You're just observing that, okay, this is where the research was conducted, this is how they conducted it. Okay, so just keep that in your memory for when I go back to the background to the research problem. Then the main findings relate to your topic. So what did the study find? And often in the abstract, they'll give you a good summary of what they found. But you're only interested in the findings that are related to your topic, not all of their findings. So extract the findings that are related to the variables you're interested in. And then I call this last section the limitations and research gaps. And this is what I call the mandated research gaps. And this is the most important element of your whole research, because this is going to justify why your research is needed. So here you typically go and look at their limitations and future research section, which is usually at the end of a thesis or at the end of a journal article. But also sometimes they mention these variables in the introduction, which is the same of the background to the research problem. They're going to highlight gaps. And if they're highlighting gaps, you can take the gaps that they highlighted and use as gaps for your study. So the introduction or the background to the research problem from a thesis or introduction from a journal article could also provide gaps. But generally, you find this in the limitations and future research. And here it says this research was conducted in a developing country, so mandated further research in other countries. So this study in the limitations said there's a need for more research in other countries on this topic. They said consumers' experience with chatbots and attitudes should be researched. So they are now saying that there's a need for more research on chatbots, specifically in terms of whatever attitudes, and a need for further study on chatbots was identified. So this is on other attitudes, different attitudes, and this was on chatbots itself. So here it's providing 3 points of strong justification. It's a 2022 article, so it's still 3 years old. So they're mandating more research in these areas. So it gives strong justification why your research could be conducted. Okay. This other study, just to say, you give the author, 2024 author, take note, colon, this is the article number. Some give article numbers, some give page numbers. So the purpose, again, related to your subject. Again, where was the study conducted? US. Quantitative experiments, 320 responses, collected respondents via Amazon MTurk, mixed demographics, and they use the CASA paradigm. The findings related to your research, and then so these are observed gaps. In other words, this is just by looking at the abstract where it was conducted, and will come. So remember this column, and then the limitations and research gaps. So they say the research was conducted in developing countries, so mandated further research other countries. So here's another study that says there's a need on their topic was virtual assistants. There's a need for more research on virtual assistants. They said there's a dearth of research on the negative implications of virtual assistants relation, so more research is needed. So here you've got justification for chatbots and virtual assistants from 2 articles. Now imagine you've done this for 120 or 100 articles. You've extracted this information. It's going to make it very easy for you to be able to write your background to your research problem and provide strong justification why your research is necessary. I just said the study should be listed in the table chronologically and then alphabetically. So if there's 5 sources from 2024, then you would list those sources alphabetically. Obviously, the in-text references would be written out in full in the reference list. And then you could also extract secondary information. So if you read their literature review, you could find literature relevant. So you could have all your headings for your literature, and you could be taking information, rewriting it immediately, and then later you can summarize, paraphrase them, and then later you can combine these sources into your different sections for your literature. But always cite the original source. So if you're taking secondary information, so another article cited someone else, you need to cite that someone else. But if you could see this article also added their own input, then you could cite both of them. The final thesis here, So let's go back to where I was. I had to jump there first. Right. So let's just close that. Okay. So research gaps observed. So I'm talking about the 3rd section of your background to your research problem is observed. So have others studied in the area. Is there a gap worth searching? Use multiple in-text referencing to collect and highlight a number of studies that identified potential research gaps by observing what others have done. In other words, these people have not specifically said there's a need for further research, but you can see that research has been conducted in different countries, different samples, industry research approaches, sample sizes, different platforms using different theoretical frameworks. So you could say here that research, there's been extensive research in Europe, and you could in-text reference 5 sources, extensive research in the US on this topic, you can and extensive research in other countries, and you could in-text reference in other 5 countries, and some research in South Africa, and you could in-text those studies, but you can say, however, hence there is a need for further research on this topic in South Africa. And you could do the same for all of these. You could say there's some research on Gen Y, Z, X, Z, or whatever, but there is a need for further research. And industry, sample sizes, theoretical platforms, you can say these are platforms, but there's a need for further research on TAM perceived risk model. But your justification should never be this. Never state that there's little, no, lack, dearth, limited research, since this is an insufficient reason to justify your research. It assumes you have access to every source that was ever written on this topic in the world, which is impossible. So rather state that based on the research gaps, so yeah, lots of research in different countries, there is still a need for further research, or additional study is required, or greater inquiry is necessary. You see how I'm phrasing it? Because often when I read journal articles and when I read students' theses, they say little research. I'm saying, right, you've read everything in the whole world, have you? So rather phrase it this way. There's a need, and you can use a number of synonyms to phrase this 1,000 different ways. Okay, so this is based on observed gaps. The studies have not specifically stated a need for more research. You've just observed that there was this country, this sample, this industry, this approach, this size, this platform. And you can have many references, and then you can just apply to your study. The fourth element is the most important element of your whole thesis, your whole study, is the mandate for further research. And in that table, that was the last column, where people specifically mandate further research is needed. Or they specify more research is needed. So versus the above research gaps where you're simply observing that the research was in a certain country, here they're saying there is a need for more research in different countries, different samples, different industries, different approaches, etc. So in the example I showed you further down, they said there were 2 studies that said there was a need for further research. So now, whereas in the first section you could have cited like 20 articles where you observed that there were gaps in section 3 of the background to the research problem, here you may only have 4 studies that said there was a need for more research. But then you can say such and such and such and such, in-text reference expressly stated there was a need for further research in different countries on virtual assistants and chatbots. And you could say other studies confirmed that there's a need for further research amongst young consumer groups, and you in-text reference them. Others stated a need for further research across different industries, and in our example, that's what we're doing. Others stated a need for more quantitative research, so that's what they're doing. Some state a need for larger sample sizes, so you can state that. And so if you could find 20 articles across these different variables, and all sort of less than 5 years old, gosh, then who can say your research is not necessary? It's the strongest form of justification if others say there must be more research. And preferably these sources, not even 5 years, should be about 3 years old at the latest. Because if it's 5 years ago, then people are going to say, well, in 5 years that need could have been solved. So if you've got a lot of 2024 and 2025 sources stating there's a need for further research, that's even stronger justification. So recent sources that mandate more research is needed is very important. Also, find journal by looking at the introduction limitations, most recent 5 years for the oldest, but preferably within the last 3 years. The last point, and this is the 5th little section, is conclude the introduction and background section with a statement that provides the main aim of your study that would serve to address the gap. So there, if you say, based on these research gaps, this study would conduct research amongst Generation Z in terms of chatbots and virtual assistant marketing in South Africa. So you just summarize what you're doing. You could easily cite 40 or 50 sources in this, or even more. Some of my students have 100 sources in this first section, which is only 2 pages long, which means that they've really read, and that would impress me. Then the second important part is the statement of research problem or problem statement. This is the heart of the research. It describes exactly what the problem is. In terms, it's a research problem in most instances. It's not a practical problem. What the extent of the problem is, why is it important in researching this problem, have others identified this problem? So that's where the mandated research comes. And if it's already research, what are the research gaps? So both observed and mandated. But in this section, it's more important to focus on the mandated gaps. In other words, people are stating there's a need for further research. And I just want to check, yeah. So different areas, your actual problem statement, you could again consider the theoretical model, your broad theme, your specific topic, the particular industry, targeted context. So the general problem for this example that I've used throughout is AI chatbots and virtual assistants used in marketing communications have not been previously tested in terms of various attitudes based on the combination of the perceived risk and TAM model. But again, not being tested is not enough. You'd have to rather say, maybe it's been tested, but, more research is required amongst all of these variables. So what's the specific problem? Do AI chatbots and virtual assistants use for result in positive attitudes? Or how do they result? Or what attitudes do they result? What is positive? What is negative? So that's sort of going more to the nitty-gritty specific. So it's very close to your aim of your research. You just stated as a problem, and you need to cite a lot of authors. So let me just show you how to do this. So here, where the above section, you're going to have lots of multiple in-text referencing. Here, specifically from your mandate for more research section, you're going to focus more on individual research gaps. So where you were given like multiple in-text referencing 5 sources, each of those 1 sources that stated there was a need for further research in different countries, you could write a line on each of them giving a bit more information. And then you could, maybe there were 3 sources that stated there was a need for further research amongst younger consumers, then you could provide more information and group those 3 articles together to just paint the picture. So you would first highlight all of these research gaps in terms of different countries, different sample sizes, different quantitative or whatever, and then you would go to the actual problem statement. So based on these research gaps, here's the general problem. This is a specific problem. Then you would give the rationale and significance. This is according to the Faculty and Business Management template. And again, this indicates why the research is significant. Why is it important to conduct the study? Who might benefit? Will further investigation be proposed? What are the expected outcomes? What are the expected results? Will a new theory or model be phrased? So you're just stating, most researchers should have a good idea of what you're going to find before, but you need to state this with literature. So a lot of the literature used in your background to the research problem you could use here, but you're just stating it from a different context, from the point of the significance and rationale of your study. And you could also include some expected outcomes. Obviously, it's good if you just read theses on the CPD website. All of them have this rationale significance section. So, but they're not in journal articles. You won't see this. In proposals, you'll see it, and particularly business, Faculty of Business and Management Sciences theses, you'll see this section in Chapter 1. So there's lots of examples where you could read. Then the aims and objectives of your study. So you need to clearly clarify the aims and objectives and envisage goals of your study. The aim is a broad statement of what your research intends to accomplish. The objectives are more concise statements that describe what the study will accomplish. Use words such as to discover, to determine, to evaluate, to ascertain, to explore, to etc., etc., etc. And all the objectives should help you achieve the aim, and the research questions must be in alignment, and the objectives should be divided into primary and secondary. So here's an example, as I say, from this example we're carrying through. So the aim of this study is to consider various cohorts attitudes to AI, chatbots, and virtual assistants used in marketing communication. The attitudes include this. The primary objective is to ascertain the perceived attitude or influence, and the secondary objectives to look at purchase intention, to look at usage factors, to look at demographic factors, influences on AI, chatbots, and virtual assistants. So this is what it could look like. And in answering these three objectives, you're answering your primary objective, you're answering your aim. The research questions are pretty much the same as the objectives, except they're in question format. So each question should be linked to the research objectives. So your primary research question should be linked to your primary research objective, and your secondary research question should be linked to your secondary research objectives. They should be explicit, unambiguous, divided into primary and secondary. They're linked to your, I've just said that, they've linked the primary research questions linked to your primary objective and the secondary to the secondary. And each question should be researchable on its own. And here you can see an example. So instead of saying to ascertain, you're saying what is the perceived attitudinal influence of AI chatbots and virtual assistants. Instead of to determine, you're saying how do cohorts' intention to purchase differ? What are the usage factors? What are the demographic factors? So you can see it's just a direct translation of these become questions. You've got three secondary research objectives. You should have three secondary research questions that match. You could have hypothesis as well, specifically for quantitative studies that predicts the relationship between two variables, usually through regression analysis and structural equation modeling, and you're making assumptions upfront which should be testable. So she had questions: financial risk negatively influences Generation Z and Y's attitudes towards chatbots and virtual assistants. So that's what she wants to prove, and these just examples of hypothesis. Right. So it is extremely important now for these initial sections that your research title is in alignment with your introduction, your problem statement, your research objectives, questions, hypothesis, and your theoretical framework. So we're going to come to the theoretical framework next. This is actually the starting point. Is, all of this should be based on some theoretical framework or underpinning. So what is the theoretical framework? It's time-tested theories. It frames the study. It's conducted from prior research findings, or at least considers prior research findings. It provides the background information that must emanate from some theoretical model or theory. The discourse should explain the how and the why. The narrative must show the where, the who, as well as a summary of their findings. So here's the two examples of the theoretical models in this examples that I've used. So TAM model considers external variables into perceived usefulness, perceived easy use, behavioral intention, and actual use. Most people don't look at the actual use, they look at these four variables, and it's often used for technology. So this model would be very suitable for AI because it's looking at technology acceptance. And then the other model that she used was perceived risk. So she's looking at certain variables. So in using new technology, there's always some type of risk. And so she's looking at 5 of these type of variables. So the theoretical framework example, so you would use the TAM model, the perceived risk model. And in your proposal, you would provide some background information about these two models. And then these are the cohorts, or the constructs, or the attitude she's looking at. Now, I've just mentioned where they come, and so she'd have to find other studies that looked at financial risk, social risk from a technological viewpoint, and include that in there, preferably on AI, but if not, on other digital media platforms. So this is the framework. The conceptual framework is your own position from the perspective of the theoretical framework. So you're going to use the theoretical framework and practically apply your work to that framework to form your conceptual framework. The research problem gives direction, expects to find, etc. You can read through it. The conceptual framework can be written and in visual format. So the conceptual framework basically focuses on what you expect to find through the research. It explains the variables, it outlines the hypothesis, it shows the variables. So in this study, here was her conceptual framework, and this is a master student, but it's quite, advanced. So she's saying that perceived risk is going to have, or if she looks at it from a positive perspective, perceived benefit. So if it's negative, you would assume they would have a negative influence on attitudes, and perceived risk, perceived ease of use, and customer engagement will have a positive use on attitudes. And then she's looking at the direct effect on risk on the intention to purchase as a result of AI chatbots and virtual assistants on intention to purchase. If she's looking at these constructs from a negative point of view, then you should expect them to have a negative influence on intention to purchase, where perceived ease of use, perceived usefulness, and customer engagements would have a positive. And then she's influence on intention to purchase, and then she's looking at the mediating effect. So you can see that the two models that I showed you has been now reformulated into her conceptual framework. And you can even have a conceptual framework for a qualitative study. The problem is that often that conceptual framework only becomes clear once you've collected the data. It's hard to create a conceptual framework for a qualitative exploratory restudy. You could have a good idea from other literature what variables would go into your conceptual framework. So you could propose something, but it would probably change. And even this framework based on our findings could also change. There may be some of these variables that don't work in the structural equation modeling, and we have to delete them. So, and all these regression lines may not work. So we may end up changing this model later, but you're proposing it at the beginning and you'll test it later and you may adapt it. So yeah, okay. So this is a good place to pause before I do the last sort of 15 minutes. Conceptual framework. We're going into the literature review because it is past and I need to go on about another 15 minutes. Are there any questions on this? I know it's information overload, but this is my formula for doing it, and I know other supervisors do it differently. But yeah, go ahead, Noxolo.
Good evening, Prof. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
So I'm attempting to use a mixed method approach, right?
Yes.
And I'm trying to determine if should I use a hypothesis or should I use a preposition, or if I can use both of them.
Good question. Look, a lot of people say you use propositions for qualitative research and hypothesis for quantitative research. So my answer to you, obviously you have to check with your supervisor, is you can use both. A lot of people just use research objectives and questions for qualitative research, and they don't have any hypothesis or propositions or at all. So you could just have research questions and objectives, but for the quantitative side, again, you don't have to have a hypothesis or a proposition. You could also just base it on research questions and objectives as well. But if you're going to use a model like I've showed you, and there is going to be regression, and you know there's a certain model you're using and there's certain variables, and you're going to collect a couple of hundred respondents, well, then you're probably going to need a hypothesis for that part of it. But remember, you will have both research questions, objectives, and then you will still have hypothesis and propositions. So the hypothesis and propositions are on top of the research questions and objectives. So in answering the hypothesis and propositions, they will answer your research questions and objectives. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it does. Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay, perfect. Anything else that you want to ask before I proceed? Okay, I'll continue. You can ask it to the end. There'll be another 10-15 minutes, because what I've covered now is really the crux. If you can get these sections right up to the theoretical framework and you exactly know what you're doing, then you're not going to have any problems whatsoever. And the literature will be easy because you'll know the variables. So yeah, it's that, and that first lot of sections is not long. You, like in a proposal, it's 4 or 5 pages tops. But if those 4 or 5 pages are jam-packed with 100 sources, and you've highlighted the gaps, you have your hypothesis, it really that will set up your whole study. Anyway, just to check, Andre, sorry that you can see the literature review overview on your screen.
It's up there, Prof.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So the literature review overview. So I've already gone through very briefly the CPT library PowerPoint. So yeah, so you can go through that. You can watch the video for more detailed information, how to find sources. But sources you're going to use to write your literature are books, journal articles, academic papers, government documents, newspapers, articles, as I say, online sources. Yeah, the literature review should move from broad to specific to create the golden thread. So usually move from the background to the overview of the topic to past and current research to the theoretical framework. So you start in broad, more broad, just giving background about AI, chatbots in my example. Now you spoke about specific things, your specific attitudes, or not attitudes, but specific marketing in AI and chatbots. Then you're looking at past and current research. So you summarize your research in tables, which you can actually even include. And then you're talking about you applying your topic to the theoretical framework that you're going to be used. In this example, it was TAM and perceived risk. But you're not just copying and pasting literature and rewriting in your own words. You need to add your critical voice, your thoughts, to form intellectual debate that agrees or disagrees with authors. So, you say you have a number of authors saying, yeah, we found positive attitudes towards this or that. And then you say, however, other authors found negative attitudes. And then you can say, well, from this point of study, we believe that we're going to find positive attitudes. So you add in your own voice. Or this study will investigate these attitudes, and it's envisaged that these attitudes will be positive or negative. So you need to continually tie in the literature to your study by continually referring back to the objectives of your study, the aims of your study, and just add in your voice with what other people are saying. Continually affirm how your study will contribute or fit the research topic and problem. And do not simply cut and paste sections, because that's plagiarism. No generative AI. So you can use AI, but not generative AI. You can't ask ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever to write, or other sections to write a section. You can't take a chunk of text and ask it to paraphrase it. You can paraphrase it in your own words, but the moment you take a chunk of text and you chuck it in Grammarly or Quillbot, and you say, and paraphrase, and you just take it as it is, or you ask it to summarize it for you. Turnitin or other platforms, I use CopyLeaks and ZeroGPT, will pick that up as 100% AI. So you need to reference, paraphrase in your own words, should I say, and combine sources. So don't take one source. So if you've summarized in your own words 10 sources, and now you combine it and you integrate and you add your own voice, you will have no problems with Turnitin. You will have no problems with AI. I strongly recommend my students use language editing tools like Grammarly and Quillbot, but I say use it only for basic grammar checks. Don't let it change your sentence. The moment it suggests a whole sentence, that whole sentence is going to be picked up by AI. As AI detection and CPT are quite strict about that. There'll be later workshops on that. So just play with AI as you go along. Use like CopyLeaks and ZeroGPT, and once you've written sections, copy it into CopyLeaks or ZeroGPT and see what it detects. And obviously, then you can play and you'll learn what you can and cannot do. Be sure to in-text reference everything you use. Use the CPT Harvard referencing technique. There's a quick guide to Harvard. There's a CPT official guide to referencing. These will be covered in later sections. Consult mainly sources that are 5 years or younger, but a ratio of 2 recent sources to 1 older source is suffice. AI. So here's just a thought I had to include a note. Do not ask AI to write your content. Also a form of plagiarism. So basically the rule of thumb with AI is anything you can ask someone else to do for you is safe to use AI. But anything you can't ask someone, so you can't ask someone else to write your thesis. So you can't ask AI to write your thesis. So what I suggest is first extract, summarize, and rewrite the information from sources in your own word, then merge them into a logical format and tie in to the specific section. Thereafter, you can use large language models such as Quillbot and Grammarly to edit, but only basic editing. Be very careful when it suggests whole sentences. Turnitin often detects AI usages when whole sentences are replaced by these language and entity models. Not even a very good tool. Yeah, it's not even a very good tool for this. Lastly, check your work against several AI detection sites such as Turnitin, ZeroGPT, Quillbot, Originality.ai, and another one I can add here is CopyLeaks. Is even better. That's probably the most robust one. Let's just make a note here. I'll add it into the presentation before I upload it. CopyLeaks. Yeah, go. And it's best to use several sites because one site doesn't pick up certain things and other sites pick up, various things. So just steer clear of AI for generative AI, but you can use it for your language. But how you use it for your language, you need to experiment with what works and what's going to be picked up as AI. Other literature review tips, just think you can read through those. Summary of literature sources, we've covered this already. Right. In your proposal, there's key concepts where you need to list, clarify, and define. So basically, you provide a definition of your key concepts, and then you provide a reference or two. You're also often asked to provide a list of abbreviations and acronyms as well. Commonly used, yeah, UK, US, etc. Yeah. Then just in the research methodology, you're going to cover whole sections on the research methodology. So I'll just spend 5 minutes on this because there are many workshops coming on here. But basically, it's the cornerstone of your research, the research paradigm, methods, and methodology. Succinct framework in the proposed research with, it's very short. Use multiple research methodology textbooks of between 5 to 10 books. And usually what you do is you provide a brief theoretical explanation of the theoretical term. Don't write a textbook. Practically apply it to your study and then justify its selection. So just on the textbooks, there's a lot of textbooks available on the CPT Libs Guide website, which is very useful. If you click on this link, there's a lot of books. But if you just type research methodology textbook.pdf in Google, you'll probably find 20, 30 books for free, which you can download, and recent ones and good ones. But this CPT library also has some good ones, not so recent, but free online books. And so, because not all books explain the research terms quite as clear as one. So you use multiple sources. You provide the definition, apply, and then justify. But do not discuss every element, like every paradigm, every design, every sampling technique. Only focus on the ones you are using and you define them, apply it to your study, and justify their selection and why not the others. And this you're going to do for your paradigm, which I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it's a common set of beliefs and agreements, how certain scientists understand problems and should be addressed. There's some good articles, Brown and Dunas, Hayden and Steenkamp. I'll make that available on Blackboard. I'm just going to make a note to myself, Steenkamp plus Brown. I'll put that on Blackboard as well, which have some good information about paradigms. But generally for quantitative, a lot of people use positivist and post-positivist. For qualitative, it could be interpretivist and postmodernism, but there's lots of others. And then there's others such as constructivist, critical theory. You need to basically define, the paradigm you're using, apply it to your study, and justify why you've used it. Right. Then research method or approach. So is it quantitative or qualitative? Define it, state why you've used it. Is it deductive or inductive? So deductive is usually quantitative research. Positivist, you move from general to specific, in other words, to prove a hypothesis. Inductive reasoning is usually interpretivist, from specific to general, and you're usually exploring or developing a new model or theory, generally associated with qualitative. Define and apply. Research design, so what are you following? There's archival, exploratory, descriptive, observational, causal. Most students generally follow some type of exploratory or descriptive research. So descriptive is usually cross-sectional. You have a survey, and it's a do question. Do you use this, So it's descriptive, cross-sectional. You define each of these terms, apply to your study. Explorative, observational, case studies, generally qualitative. You're answering a why question. You're exploring. Again, state and justify why you're using this research design. Sampling, so where are you going to draw your sample from? So who's your sample? So e.g. it could be the Western Cape, a specific community, suburb, or organization. Who will the research population be selected from? So sample frame, e.g. a sample frame could be CPT students. The list of units from which they'll be drawn. A sample unit is the basic unit. So it's a CPT use unit. Who's been exposed to AI chatbots and virtual assistants? Who hasn't? And the sampler element is the smallest element of your research. So it's a CPT student exposed to AI chatbots who are Gen Z. So it's very specific. Only these people can answer your research. So you need to explain each term and apply it to your study. Then also the sampling methods, so probability methods. Most of you won't be using that because you need to have a list of every respondent. So it would be simple, random, systematic, stratified, cluster, or multi-stage. Okay, a lot of people do use multi-stage even for non-probability. So typical elements that we use is convenience, quota, purposive, or judgmental, which is often for qualitative. Convenience and snowballing is often used for quantitative, and you could use more than one element. You could start off, you could use a multi-stage, start off with a convenience sample at CPUT, gather a few students, and then use snowball sampling where they recommend other people. So then that would be a multi-stage. So again, choose which technique you're using, justify it. Determinants of sample size is just a rough approach. If you've got 10 thesis, 10 per construct item, so is a rough, and you've got 30 per subcategory, and you would just say 30 times by 10, then you do 300. But there are a lot of sample calculators. If you just click sample calculator, I know there's one by Railsoft. You can type in, if you know how big the sample size is, it can do the calculations for you. But if you want to be really safe for quantitative research, if you calculate 300, if you select 384 for probability sampling, then you're fine. But there's no real, for non-probability, I mean, there's no real formula because it's non-probability. So dependent on subcategories here, which I mentioned. Qualitative, anywhere between 10 and 50, depending. Sometimes people even go bigger for qualitative, but most of my students sort of do between 10 and 20. If they're doing small businesses, 10 and 20 is usually suffices for a master study. It could be a bit bigger for a doctoral study. Or you could use the saturation method. So when no new information is gathered from new respondents, then you've reached saturation. That's called data saturation, is another technique used for qualitative. Data collection instruments, so what instruments are you using? So quantitative could be a group administered questionnaire or survey, electronic, telephone, face-to-face surveys, experimental. A lot of people are using Google Forms. Qualitative could be a document review, observation, interviews such as in-depth and semi-structured, focus groups, what information was used, so a lot of these research instruments, your constructs and that you are taking from other studies. So, if you see journal articles and theses that are close to your study, contact the authors and say, can I use your research instruments? And then you can adapt them according to your study. Particularly with, all the different attitudes and constructs, they must come from somewhere. You can't just make it up. And that's important for reliability and validity, particularly for quantitative studies where you get in intention to purchase, attitudes, perceived ease of use. You need to take that from the original authors of those studies and adapt it to your study then. And then you should get reliable and valid results. Use existing research. And then you can pilot your questionnaires as well for qualitative research. Data collection, so how you collect the data, you need to explain this: telephone, online, electronic, email, face-to-face. Just define the processes. There's forms, you could use Google Forms, SurveyMonkey or others, or physical distribution. You can also collect qualitative data by Teams, Zoom, Google Meet. A lot of people, you don't even need to go there anymore. You can just, since COVID, people are using these platforms, whereas in the past you had to go and have an appointment, and then you needed to have a dictaphone and record the presentation. Now, these platforms have transcripts. You just go and look at the transcript afterwards, and then that saves you a lot of time and money and makes it much easier to do qualitative research, provided you can get the people to agree to these interviews. That's your biggest problem, particularly if they're high profile people. Data coding and analysis. So what program we use. So for quantitative, use SPSS, AMOS. For qualitative, Atlas TI. Generally, we start with descriptive stats, numerical and graphs for theses. And then there's different means and medians and standard deviations and ANOVAs and different tests for quantitative, and qualitative is content, hermeneutics, conversational, discourse analysis. There's different analysis for qualitative. Thematic analysis is another one. So you need to explain why you use these different techniques and how they'll help you answer your questions, basically. Your supervisors will guide you on that, hopefully. Then the next, we're near the end, by the way, is demarcation or delimitation. So which aspects of the given research area will be targeted for this research? Provide why these reasons were selected. So you need to delineate the boundaries of your research. So in this example, they're just looking at Gen Z and they're looking at university students, no other codes. So you need to state this in delimitations. We're focusing on this, explain why, and say, well, it's convenient sample, cost, I'm a student, it's cost implications. We limit to the Cape Town region. Again, I can't, go across the whole South Africa. It's only a little master thesis. Only chatbots and virtual assistants. There's hundreds of different forms, but you can say these are the variables that are relevant to digital marketing communication. So justify with literature even. It might also be useful to say what you won't cover in your research. Ethical considerations are pretty much standardized if you look at the CPT ethic documents, which will be another workshop later in the year. So state the ethical implications, how we address minors. So, you can only interview people 16 and older. Consider the CPUT FREC, in other words, Faculty Research Ethics Committee, what they require. Informed consent, privacy, honesty, SUMRA, what do all these mean? Define each of these. A lot of textbooks provide a lot of information on these ethical considerations, as well as the CPUT ethics documents, which you will be exposed to in a later workshop. And read other theses as well from CPUT, and you'll see there's sort of standard information that's included here. Then you need to also provide an outline of your thesis, so the introduction and background, and problem statement, literature review, methodology, findings, discussion, conclusions. You would just describe this in a couple of lines. And here's an example. Some people have a research plan, and so I provided an example of it. My students, the moment they've got ethics, I get them to do a big research proposal, and then they collect the data even before they finish the literature review. But most people go to literature review, design, then do the study, then results, then discussion, and then you have various drafts of your thesis, and you can put dates. Always put the max date. So if you're part-time, space it out to 4 years. If you finish it in 2 years, no problem. But if you don't finish it in 2 years, and you said you're going to finish it in 2 years, and now you're 2 years over, it's going to cause a problem on HTC Digital. So rather, if you're a full-time master student, space out these dates for 3 years and say you're going to graduate the next year in April. Or if you're a part-time master student, space it out for 4 years. If you're a full-time doctorate student, space it out for 4 years. If you're a part-time doctoral student, space it out for 6 years. If you finish earlier, it's no problem, but if you finish much later than what you said, it's going to be a problem. And here's a, say, alternative structure where I often, as soon as they've got ethics, I get my students to get the data, because once you know what you found, it's easier to update your literature review chapters because you know what you found. So you write into the end point that you already know. Whereas if you finish your literature review chapters, then you collect your data, then you've actually got to go back to your literature review and adapt the data because you were writing blindly. You didn't know what you were going to find. But once you know what you found, you need to tweak your literature to match it. So often my students are done with their data well before they finish their literature review, because once you know what you found, it just makes it easier to write your literature review. And then, obviously your discussion follows. Limitations is another section in the Faculty of Business Management Sciences FHDC template. So what are the hindrances of your research? What do you envisage will stop you? Maybe limited time. What factors will compromise? What are the limitations of the research? Look at methodological coverage, generalization limitations. Most journal articles also provide a limitation section. And here's some examples I said. It was conducted in a developing country where AI chatbots may not be as broadly investigated and used for marketing in other countries. It's quantitative, so it provides a cross-section of the study, but it doesn't provide in-depth information like qualitative research and longitudinal study. Um, Cross-analysis, it may or may not conduct cross-analysis of demographic and usage factors, and only specific cohorts are being used. So these are limitation examples. And then the reference list, so you need to follow the CPUT guide, and I provided you with a link to the LibGuides where it gives you research support on referencing and plagiarism. I give you a link to the official Harvard CPUT style. I give you a link to other useful referencing documents. And then recently I've made two YouTube videos this year where I take you through the referencing. So when I put this document up on Blackboard, you'll be able to look at those videos. And yeah, I believe that is it. Okay, we started 20 minutes late and we finished 20 minutes late. So, are there any questions? Go ahead, Sibukola. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for that guidance. When we were talking on literature review,
Yes.
and then you were indicating that you can use sources, but also add the critical voices to why your research is imperative. However, how do you then package your own views or your own critical voice? Because a lot of the reviewers or supervisors would say, I would have a sentence in my own words, my critical voice, and then they would ask, who is the source? So how do I then package
Yes.
it so that it is mine, it is my source?
It's a very, very, very good question. So, you know, so let's just give an example. So you can,
Martin.
yeah, so we can, right. So example of this could be, say, for example, a number of studies are talking about, and let's just use the example, AI chatbots and how it's growing in terms of being used for marketing, and you in-text reference them, right? Then you can say, therefore, owing to these authors' discussions, it's believed that I believe, but you're not allowed to use first person. So you've always got to write yourself in the third person. So you say, therefore, this study is of the view that AI chatbots and marketing will also grow in South Africa. There you've added your own voice, you know, so you continually tie it back. It may not be critical where you say we disagree, or you could say this study is of a contrary view. And we believe this study believes that, or the findings we envisage, the study envisages that the findings will not find growth on AI chatbots in South Africa. So there you've stated your view. And that's a negative view because these studies could be saying positive, but you could say we believe, and then you could provide a reason, your own reason. So then they can see. You always need to say, always refer to your study as this study or this research, and when referring to other studies, refer to it as the study, right? And if you keep that clear when referring to other studies as the and your study as this, then they know when you are talking and when you are referring to other studies. And then, because I think what happens is supervisors get confused, and I think your critical analysis came from somewhere else. But if you keep referring to yours as this study is of the view, then they know it's you. But then you can never use the word this when referring to other studies, because otherwise that's going to create confusion. Does that help?
Excellent. It covers me. Thank you so much.
Okay. Is it Nadia? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Anadia?
Hello, all good. It's Nadia.
Nadia. Nadia. There we go. Okay.
I want to find out if there's a list of licensing that CPT might have available. For example, when you have to do your AI checks, for example, it can be quite painful having to submit 50 words at a time, as
So,
well as
yes.
managing your resources like your references, and where can we access those licenses?
Okay, Nadia, in terms of the AI, this is still in development. So currently, when you have Turnitin access via your supervisor, when you run your chapter through, you need to run all your proposal through, you as the student will only be able to see the similarity, okay? But your supervisor will have an extra tab where they'll be able to see the AI. So when you run your chapter through or your proposal through Turnitin, you just need to drop your supervisor or whoever's given you access to Turnitin, and say, please, could you check the AI report? I've just submitted my proposal, or I've just submitted my chapter. However, I suggest that prior to you submitting your full proposal or chapter to AI, you use two sources. I always tell my students to use Zero GPT. It's not so good, but the one which is better is Copy Leaks, and both of them allow you to copy and paste about 5 pages at a time. Zero GPT and CopyLeaks. CopyLeaks is quite fickle. Sometimes you search for and then it says, no, you must subscribe. But then what I do is I open my Gmail account, I close it, and then I open it again, and then suddenly I can again upload words. It does limit how much you can upload in a day, but then it clears it. And once I found a link that works, then you just bookmark it so that each time you go in, and if it ever says you need to subscribe, then. But if you clear on CopyLeaks and Zero GPT in terms of AI, I can guarantee you that when you run your work through Turnitin, which is not as powerful as those, that it's not going to detect AI. In terms of other resources, like if you want a referencing resource like Mendeley or whatever, if you go to the CPT library, there's a postgraduate office there. There's people that can help you there, but also if you go to the CPT library website, there's a chatbot that always pops up and says, how can we help you? Then take advantage of that, and you can then speak to them and they can direct you to the right person to get some of those other tools set up. So if you click on that research support link I showed you, you'll see there's a lot of resources there that you just need to explore that library website that can help you a lot. But in terms of the AI, CPT uses Turnitin as the official one, but I tell my students rather just get your chapters and your proposals, use CopyLeaks, use Zero GPT, and if it's clear on those, it's pretty much going to be clear on Turnitin. And then I just say, once you've sent your chapter or your proposal and you want to know what the AI percent, if there is AI, just drop me a mail and I'll quickly check. If there is AI, I'll download the report and I'll email it to you. So that's how I operate with my students. Yeah. Great. Any other questions about anything you may ask? I know this is the first workshop and you're going to be exposed to a lot of other things, but anything else? So as I say, I will upload this PowerPoint as well as some notes to Blackboard later tonight, and I will also upload this video to YouTube for ease of access, and I'll also upload that link on Blackboard, so you'll have access to everything that was said, as well as the notes and all the materials and some other supplementary material I'll put for you. I'll put it on, as well as even the FHDC template, but I think that's already there. I think they probably covered that last Thursday. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have gone half an hour over, but we probably started just about half an hour late. I hope you got something out of this. There's a lot more workshops. Just please take note of the links. Hopefully, Dr. West will send the update link. So I think the best link is at the moment is not to click the link in the actual schedule, but click the link on the email that she sent. And I need to, yeah, so she'll send a new schedule, and hopefully all the HODs and research coordinators will forward that to you for future reference. So thank you very much. Have a good night, and do check Blackboard later where I'll place this material. Great. I'm going to stop recording now. Stop recording.